Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here in the session. I would like to start the session because we are already rather late. So I will give my word to Francesco Panini, who will talk a bit about the work that we have been doing with the white papers on ESA side, and he has been a great contributor on the area of psychology. So give my word to you.
Well, thank you, Nash. Can we start with the slides? I can talk about it randomly, but if we have yeah. You have a clicker?
I'm a great moderator.
Thank you. No, it's fine. We like when things happen on the way. So good morning, everybody. My name is Francesco Pagnini. I'm from Italy, and I'll be talking about I'll be giving a sort of a quick introduction about the psychological aspects of human space exploration. And most of the work I'll be talking about will come from the results of the working group from ESA, who published the white paper about the psychological challenges that are still waiting for us for the next 10 or 20 years, at least in our expectations right now. Because when we think about health in space, we saw a lot of presentations about the physical aspects. Medical components are really important, but it's not just that. If we want to thrive in space, if we want to have a successful space exploration and we're sending humans there, we also need to take care of the mental side, so the psychological aspects. And the psychological hurdles in particular that astronauts experience are of a pivotal importance. And this deals with, first of all, performance. We want to have astronauts who well perform in space. We want to rely on their task, on their abilities to perform the tasks. And so to truly excel, astronauts should keep their focus, their clarity, their mental presence. And it's our job as scientists, and in our specific case as psychologists, to create the best conditions for that. And so one of the things is that if we want astronauts to succeed, to be in a good performance, we want them to be able to perform the task that we ask them to do. Can you tone it down a little bit? I'm sorry, we're still in the middle of trying things. But if we want them to succeed and to perform the task that they have to, we want to keep them in a good psychological state. Mental well-being isn't just something that it's important because, we like to be well and that's good. It's not just that. It's also the more selfish motivation of a person perform better if it is in a better mental shape. So it's not just for the sake of well-being that we need to take care of the mental side. It's crucial for the actual unfolding of the mission. So we need to develop strategies for that. And the word we always say is proper countermeasures. And this is particularly true when we move from what we know quite well, that is low orbit life, like on the ISS, and similar aspects like Mir in the past and so on. But when we move forward, when we go towards next destinations like the Moon, Gateway, and even Mars, then new psychological challenges will pop up. And there are aspects that are structural within the environment that will pose a challenge. So for example, the duration. Right now, we do have a few astronauts that have been on the ISS for about a year or more. So we have some data there, but it's just some. And what about having this sort of extended mission, but you go on the ISS, you check outside and you see Earth, and that is a vast psychological impact. What if we go farther from Earth and suddenly you don't see it anymore? You look outside and just see stars. What is the impact of that? Then there is confinement and isolation. We know that from the ISS studies as well. We can reproduce that in analog environments. This is very important. But what about putting all these things together? And on top of that, if we talk about the Mars mission, there will be communications delay. So we will not be able to provide immediate feedback. And that will have a change in decision-making strategies. Because right now, if there's an issue on the ISS, Houston is there, Earth is there to help solving the problem. But what if it takes 30 minutes to reach Earth to give a message? It's a very different scenario. And psychologically speaking, that creates a whole different environment. Now, all that said, what are the gaps in knowledge that our working group has identified? Well, there are many. So first of all, what kind of individual characteristics? What are the astronauts 2.0 that we're going to send to space? Are they going to be similar to the astronauts? Is the characteristics going to be similar to the ones we look for right now? Will the astronauts, today's astronauts, be a perfect fit for tomorrow's mission? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there will be some characteristics that we still need to identify that we may want to pay more attention to, that are somehow put on a side right now. And once we identify this aspect, and that's a gap, I don't have the answer here, but that's something we should be working on. And once we identify these things, how do we select that? How do we, how can we assess the biomarkers, the components, the aspects that will say, okay, this person is a good fit? So that's an open question. Because so far, the space agencies have a tremendous experience in selection, in the selection process. But what if we change the premises? That would open a new aspect, a new scenario. And for the reasons I mentioned, so for the different components that are there in long duration missions and missions that will go in deep space exploration, there will be specific stressors. How do we cope with that? Now, space agencies have, and ESA and NASA as well, they have developed some countermeasures. But to be honest, we still need to work on these countermeasures because, especially with communications delays, with new autonomy from the crew, new things have to be factored in the actual development of these new countermeasures. So the question about how can we tone down stress levels, what can we do on Earth during training, what kind of new aspects, what kind of new training we can insert, that's an open question. And what about in space? What can we do to reduce stress? Will we add more physical exercises? Will we add more team games? These are all open questions that we still need to think about. Then I quickly mentioned team dynamics. Well, it's not just a matter of selecting the right people with individual characteristics that would be a good fit for the mission. It's also the kind of team dynamic. It's not just selecting a bunch of people identical from a psychological perspective, but it will be a good mix. We need to identify a good composition for the team. And so the dynamics, again, how do the individual characteristics play together? Factors like age, experience, culture, gender. And gender probably deserves a specific aspect, a specific idea, because if we send people for long duration missions, think about a 3-year span, and we send, of course, a mixed gender crew, what are the odds, even not with mixed gender, but just for the sake of conversation, what are the odds that some romantic interest, not necessarily relationships, but what about romantic interest, will start developing in the crew? How do we do that? How do we handle it? And things like that. These are open questions, because as long as the missions remain confined in a limited amount of time and close to Earth, this is way more manageable. But what about this sort of autonomy that we're going to ask the crew to deal with? So these are things that, again, still need to face. And more in general, the interpersonal relationships, it's not just teamwork. It's not just putting together the teams. It's also making a mixture of cultures. And I'm sure that everybody who works with astronauts can come up with some interesting and funny sometimes anecdotes about cultural miscomprehension. So how do we deal again with that? And how can we use different, differences in terms of cultures to create a good mix and to have a team that works? In the group, we thought there was an interesting point to make, just as a standalone point. More in general, what about copying and resilience? How can we allow the astronauts to thrive in space? Now, thrive is a word that within our working group, and same with the SciSpace group that took care of the human components here, thrive is a word that we've debated. Can we thrive in space? Because space, from many perspectives, medical and psychological, is an extremely hostile environment. Can we thrive there? Can we thrive there? Can we flourish there? Again, that's an open question. Now, we know that space also brings a lot of opportunities from a psychological perspective. Think about the overview effect. But what about thriving in an environment that is not as well known as the ISS? What about the Gateway mission? What about Lunar? What about Mars? There are so many unknowns that we're still facing. So how can we improve the coping skills? How can we make astronauts more resilient? I know that we're going to select people who will be super resilient. That's not the question. But over time, the incremental effect of stress will take a toll on the psychological well-being and the resistance, not just resilience, on the resistance that one person has. So what can we do to balance that, to boost coping skills and resilience? And here we have some options, some ideas. On top of that, the elephant in the room, the radiations. We talk a lot about radiation. We mostly talk about radiation for medical reasons. Now, we don't have data this is just a speculation, so we don't have actual data to prove the statement, but we cannot rule out the possibility that radiation may also influence cognition and psychological aspect. We just don't know. And since we don't know, we cannot say, okay, it's fine, that's okay. So sometimes with my students, I make this joke that, let's say we're sending people to Mars, we don't have enough, protection from radiation, so an astronaut looks outside and sees an alien from the spacecraft, which, how can you say it's an alien? Maybe it's just an hallucination given by, some unexpected effects of the radiation on the synaptic level. It's a joke, of course. It's not an expectation. But we need to be aware that there could be an issue there at that level, especially on the mood level, perhaps. Now, psychological support has done a tremendous job so far in supporting astronauts in space. Right now, there are, I'm going to say a few psychologists who work directly with astronauts when they are in space, unneeded and on schedule calls. Different agencies have different organizations, and that has been working great. But again, communication delay. We will not be able to do any form of telemedicine when people will be out of a certain range. It takes, some form of immediate or semi-immediate response to have a conversation. So we'll need to come up with other ideas. Maybe we can factor in artificial intelligence. Maybe we can factor in some group support or train somebody within the crew. These are all options that we could explore. But again, we don't have the answer right now. And back to the coping ideas, what are the things that we can do here in the training and perhaps automatically implement on board? And the example that I make is an easy one for me because I work with mindfulness and mind-body practices. And so one example, just to make it clear, is that we could consider training astronauts in mindfulness, make them proficient on that level, having that strategies to deal with stress, and then boost it while in space with additional exercises that could also involve the team. So there are things we can work on. But again, we don't have the answer because we don't have data so far. So to give you a very brief idea about some things we're working on, this is a project that is about, we don't have data yet, but just to give you an idea of what is going on, that's a project about relaxation training in space. The idea is to train astronauts while they're here. So they will be trained in relaxation techniques. It's going to be a brief one, won't take much time on their schedule. And once they are on the ISS, they will practice there following audio narratives, and we'll keep track of their level of stress, sleep patterns, and so on. So this is an example of one of the possible countermeasures. And again, I cannot sell you as a countermeasure because we need to prove that it's effective. But it's hopefully going on. And another one is something that we're currently testing in Antarctica at Concordia. This is a study, we call it Mindful Eyes. Now, a few years ago, for a couple of missions in Concordia, we assess the level of mindfulness, so the disposition of being in the present moment, and we assessed it compared to the level of stress. And data clearly indicate that those who were more mindful, mindful attitude, had a lower level of stress over the mission, while those with those who are higher in mindfulness had a lower level of distress, while those who are less mindful experience more stress. So what we're doing now is trying to increase the general level of mindfulness by training them with a very simple training that requires only a few minutes per day for 3 weeks, and giving them some booster sessions while they are on Concordia. So we're going to make some calls with them and do some practice and exercises. And don't think about mindfulness as just meditation stuff. We shipped to Concordia a bunch of games, Lego, other things to play with, and it makes sense from a mindfulness perspective because they're going to do mindfulness-based exercises that will be fun and engaging, which will probably increase, at least we hope, the adherence rate. How much time have I got? Run out of time? Okay, so that's in a nutshell some of the points we, as white paper working group, come up with, and just a couple of examples of the kind of countermeasure. But again, the field is open. There are multiple potential countermeasures that we either have already studied, so we already know that they do work or they do not, and a bunch of other hypotheses. I'm not going through all of them. You can find them in the paper. If you don't find it, you can send me an email. I'm happy to share it. But these are a bunch of options of countermeasures that may need more studies and could be helpful in boosting psychological well-being, especially during long-duration missions. That's it. Thank you.
Maybe questions? Any question? Hi. Your floor is.
Well, to show you actually the impact of well-being and psychology on the human being is I was just in an island in Greece and I could buy this T-shirt. Now this is really amazing because it shows the essence of being lonely looking at the earth. But the fact that you can buy this type of T-shirt in a normal shop, I mean, they had nothing to do with space, means that actually this is indeed also going to compel in the community. Now my question is the following. What about this Mars 500 mission, where at the end one of the conclusions was that the longer the evolution was in isolation, the more was the sort of like, I wouldn't say revolution, but distinct from Mother Earth. in the sense that Mother Earth gave some commands, but they say, yeah, okay, well, we'll do our own thing. So what are your comments on that? Are there other missions who have been replicating this sort of like distance also in authority?
Well, this is a very good question because it addresses one of the issues of autonomy. And again, different decision-making strategies, because once we know that there may be some form of detachment from the command structure, let's frame it this way, then we can work on countermeasures with that. But again, that goes back to what kind of participants do we want? Do we want to select them for their obedience so that even at the long distance we still rely on the fact that they will do what we say? Or maybe, or maybe we want to increase those who are more creative in problem solving so that we rely on their ability to deal with stuff. These are very open questions. I don't have the answer because I think we need to make science out of that. You mentioned Mars 500, I wasn't involved in that, but we need analogs like that. We need to test different options and see which ones work better. Great issue though.
More questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Adriana, is really?
Thank you. That was very interesting. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a planetary scientist by training. I'm just wondering, though, in terms of obviously what has happened recently around the world with COVID and various lockdowns in different countries that had different rules. So in the UK, we had lockdowns, then we didn't, then we did, then we didn't, and sometimes we could go out and sometimes we couldn't go out, and it was awful. Has there been any, I'm presuming that psychologists are also looking at the effect of isolation, lack of communications with friends and family or delayed communications, disruption, all of that stress. So are any of those studies applicable, do you think, to the work in looking at isolation and psychological stresses in space? Okay, it's not the same, but it's still about being isolated and not being able to sort of behave or work in a normal, inverted commas way. Thanks.
Well, I think so. I think during COVID, we had the surge of science. Psychological science was on the verge there because, of course, at the beginning, we all studied the impact because also we were at home. So, that's the thing you do, right? So, yes, we have accumulated an enormous amount of information there. Now, whether this is directly transferable to the space environment, I'm not sure about it. I think it's more the vice versa. So when there was the COVID, the pandemic, I remember the people in Concordia, they could share, their own experience. Like, oh, this is how we cope with isolation. So it was more on the other side. And I'm sure there will be experiences in managing isolation from COVID that will translate to space as well. I'm having trouble finding out the specific strategy, but yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm a flight surgeon at the European Astronaut Center, but this topic is very dear to me because I did the winter orbit in Concordia some years back. Two short questions, if I may. The first one, I agree with you completely that it's great to select teams or at least people that are compatible, and the sum of the crew is actually more than if you add just the qualities of the people. How realistic is that in the future? Because in exploration, we know we have different agencies, so there is a political factor, I guess, on who goes, and also in the commercial world, where actually you have people that can actually buy a seat to go to space. And my second question is relaxation techniques or mindfulness. Is it hard, I assume, to convince high-performance individuals to dedicate time that they don't necessarily think they have to that? Thank you.
I think I could answer both your questions with just my smiling face and an ironic smile, because you're perfectly right on both sides. Yes. Well, we do science, so we try to identify what is, in our view, in the data we have available, the best option. And that's it. And then, of course, the agencies and science and politics does, and they do the rest. And for relaxation, yes, this is hard. And there are many reasons. You can imagine that a high-performance person simply doesn't want to be involved in something that could put them on the spot. So yes, it's not an easy study. It's not an easy kind of study to run, but we have to. Well, I think it's important to explain and to engage the participation, because it's not just you do because you do. It makes sense within a framework that will give a better meaning of the general strategy for research. So I think this is the most important thing. And then of course there's a privacy thing. There's a you can protect your participants as much as you can, at least. Okay. Should move forward.
You are pushy, Floris. Okay. Save for the last, because if this goes well, maybe we can do a panel discussion in the end. Okay. Maybe Pedro, let's just give the floor to Pedro. Don't forget your question, Floris. Pedro works in the University of Lusófona in Lisbon. He's going to talk about the team dynamics in confined and extreme environments. So Pedro, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Very brave of you to be here today, so it's exciting. I'd like to start by thanking the European Space Agency for the kind invitation to be here today. And of course also to my department and to the Portuguese Space Agency for enabling all the research I'm going to share with you a little bit, and my attendance here. So building on Francesco, I'll be talking a little bit about teamwork in isolated, confined and extreme environments, and some lessons learned from analog studies done in the past couple of years that also had to the discussion we are just having. So to give you a brief summary, I'll share some findings from two different studies. The first one regards the first Portuguese lunar analog mission in a lava tube last year at Terceira Island. Actually, 1 year ago from today, we are ending the mission, so it's a nice coincidence. And here, a place you all know very, very well by now, that is another study we have a few years ago at the Concordia Research Station. But let's just establish here some common ground. We talk a lot about mental health. We talk a lot about teamwork. But at the end of the day, we also need to have a working definition we can rely on to make sure we are all on the same page. So we can fairly agree that the team is a group of at least 2 individuals that share at least one common goal, and that they somehow need to work independently through communication, through technology, through the tasks they do to achieve that goal. And now the interesting part here, especially for space, is that we usually assume that these teams, they are embedded in a broad system, and they have what we call some loosely defined boundaries. So who's on the team actually depends on the tasks you're doing. So sometimes your team is the crew from your space program, sometimes the team is the entire crew inside the space station, and sometimes the crew is also the people on mission control on Earth that are trying to help you to come up with a solution. So this idea of what is a team for who is in space, for instance, might change every now and then. And for the remainder of this presentation, I'll be trying to share some data to answer this research question, because the goal here is to kind of look at the intersection between environmental and contextual factors and how they interact with mental health and collaboration. Because we know that mental health in short and long duration space missions, it can decrease pretty fast, given the right conditions. We also know that, not only from mice environments, but we also know that mental health is directly related with your ability to self-regulate, to cope, to handle conflict, to think creatively. So it impairs teamwork. And from environmental psychology, from human factors, from medicine, we also know that the physical environment in which you are embedded also plays a big role in your ability to self-regulate and to collaborate with others. So here, in the two studies I'll show, we try to explore this kind of triangulation a bit in depth. So for the first case, yes, I'm sharing some of the data we collected during the Camões analog mission. So it happened, as I said, last year inside a lava tube, and it was used as a proof of concept. So we just wanted to show that these infrastructures, at least in Portugal, they are reliable to be used as space analogs if anyone wants to pick on that. So where did this happen? As I said, it happened at Terceira Island, which is right in the middle of the archipelago. And what you can see here is the aerial view of the station, not the station, but the cave, where we have the main entrance, which is more or less like 35 square meters, which we used as a base camp, where we had most of our logistics. And then the cave, you can see the drawings here. We had a permanent camp inside the cave, and we would spend 2/3 of our time inside the cave, working or sleeping, and then 1/3 of the time on base camp, taking care of logistics, preparing meals, and with toileting and stuff, because you can't actually do you cannot leave any biological waste inside the cave because of the preservation of the biome. For this particular mission, and these are some important details, there were 7 crew members, but the team was quite big because we had 4 mission control, 4 mission doctors, and everyone, and this I think then for later for discussion, this is interesting because everyone was actively involved in the preparation of the mission. So it was not just mission control or not just the medical doctors. Everyone was for 4 months actively engaged, which then had interesting implications for how the mission unfolded, and I'll come to that later. In this particular study, what I'm going to share with you is some of the data we gather during the 7 days on mental health and teamwork. For teamwork, we use the Team Steps inventory that is based on the Team Steps methodology that is used in hospital surgery as a process of collaboration. And we also gather, we did daily measurements of temperature and humidity, so we also have that data here. And for quantitative analysis, although it's a small sample size, so our sample power is quite small, the hierarchical linear modeling played quite well. So in the end, we'll probably just use non-parametric testing and some repeat measured correlations that also show some interesting findings. So if we start from the graphs on the left, what we can see here, there's a linear trend, a positive linear trend for temperature and a negative trend for humidity. Also, you can clearly see a spike on the 5th day. And to give you an idea, on the 5th day of our mission, it rained in the Azores like within the past decade. So one day rained as much as 10 years in the Azores. So at the cave was wet, but was okay. And on the 5th day, we woke up with a waterfall inside the cave and water flooding beneath the tents. So that was nice. And so that's why you see the spike, and that spike has implications for the group dynamics. Then what you also see is that for task cohesion, well, there's quite some variation, but the linear trend is non-significant. So we can say it was fairly stable. And the interesting part as well I can tell is that on the 4th, on the 3rd night, so the 3rd to the 4th day, we had our first group team building inside. And then I can tell you what we did. And you can clearly it helped with the trajectory because that matches the social moments we had. Then T processes were fairly stable, and we can see there that mental health declined over time significantly, and team effectiveness also declined a little bit. And why do we see these slight declines? Because although we were a crew of 7, there were subgroups in the crew that had specific science goals or support goals. So we had a shared goal, which was to make it happen. So everyone was highly committed towards making the mission a success. But then different individuals have different scientific goals. So that created an interesting dynamics of sometimes we were a cohesive unit of 7, but then sometimes different people were doing different stuff. And there were actually, let's say, sometimes 2 to 3 subgroups, and some people were alone doing their own activities. So this gives you a sense of the trajectories over the 7 days. Then if we look at correlation table, and these are the repeated measured correlations, and although it's a small data set, it's preliminary data, what we found some interesting results that we want to keep looking, namely the relationship between temperature, humidity, mental health, and teamwork. And if you look at the right-left down corner of the heat map, what we found is that over time we see that mental health co-evolves with humidity in a positive linear trend. And we also see that the same goes for team processes and teamwork effectiveness. So this is not the first time this result is found. If you look into environmental psychology, environmental studies, there is a correlation between mental health and different factors within air quality. But this again brings to the discussion to what extent the temperature, the quality of the artificial atmosphere inside a space station or a space vehicle is playing an active role in the extent to which individuals report being psychologically well or ill, and their ability to work together as a group. For our second study, this is quite going the extreme opposite direction, because first I showed you a 7 days analog mission. Now I'm going to show you some data from a 40 weeks, roughly 40 weeks mission at Concordia Research Station. And in this case, we had a similar goal, but also a quite different goal. So here we are using wearables. And the wearables we are using are more or less the size of a 5 zlotys coin or 2 euro coin. And they allow you to measure social interactions in real time. So these sensors, what they do is they use a radio signal that every 20 seconds checks if there's anyone around. And then, because they have incorporated an accelerometer, they can actually tell if the interactions were merely by chance or they are really meaningful interactions. And they can tell us if we are face-to-face, so we are interacting with someone right, like intentionally oriented towards the person, or we are just, passing by and that was a random accident and we are side by side, but our backs are turned, so there's not really an interaction going on. It's just a coincidence that these people are together, okay? And we did something else. We actually had a fantastic station doctor, like always, but really amazing, that also installed what we call towers. So besides having people wearing the sensors, he also installed stable sensors across the station, except inside the dorms. Okay, so that way we could know not only. This is not what I want to show you. This one, we could tell not only how much time, for instance, people spent with other people, but also how much time did they spend in the different rooms of the station. And now that I'm mentioning, just to show you this graph here, we had 4 deployments during the mission duration. And within these 4 deployments, we gathered sociometric data and we gathered surveys, because besides testing the viability of the badges, we also want to look for an overlap between sociometric data and surveys. Okay, because eventually in the long term, the surveys can give you information that makes the surveys less needed, and therefore there's less time consumption from the crew, because they already give you a close approximation of individual and collective psychological processes. And what we found was that over the 4 deployments, people spent less and less time together, although they spent the same amount of time in the different rooms available at the station. So it basically speaks, they didn't change the routines about the places they were going, but they over time they start avoiding spending more and more time with each other, which resonates to previous research, actually from Professor Gorsandal, that also speaks to these findings. So this is another way of showing previous evidence from surveys. Now going a bit back, there's something happened during the mission, and we had the qualitative accounts of the reports that the medical doctor was doing that speak to these findings. If we start with the graph on the left, what do we see? We can see that cohesion, on individual level, we can see that psychological safety and perceived performance were quite positive in the first half of the mission. And if you don't know, psychological safety is this general belief that in my group of work, I can speak my mind without fear of any consequences. So I can speak up openly about whatever I'm worried about or whatever I want to suggest to the group. And we know that in many group and organizational cultures, that's not easy. You cannot speak up your mind if you don't agree with something. And so that's why it is about. And oppositely, we say that paranoia and loneliness, they are roughly moderate, but tending to decline, which is good. But then, halfway through the mission, so between the 4th and 5th deployment, we see an inflection here in the trajectories. And we can clearly see loneliness and paranoia increasing and psychological safety and performance decreasing. And this is all non-parametric, okay? When we go to the team factors, we see the exact same pattern. So we see that cohesion, reflexivity, and performance, they were doing quite nice. Actually, they were increasing towards the halfway of the collection. Whereas team conflict was actually healthy, because you need a moderate level of conflict to make it really, really work. So we don't want to get rid of conflict. We need conflict, but on a healthy amount. Now, again, halfway through the mission, conflict spikes, and team processes and cohesion go down. Okay? So we know from the reports that something happened around this time here that triggered this situation. Okay? So we roughly know, we don't know the details, but we know something happened. And if we keep on looking at our data, these are the average contact signals of the badges over the 4 deployments. And what we have here is that we know that we had an Italian crew and we had a French crew. The medical doctor was just one person, so here I'm not including the data of the medical doctor because he was also here. And what we see here is the frequency of interactions within and between subgroups. And over time, you can see there's a polarization in the group structure. So Italians start spending more time with Italians, and French start spending more time with French and less time with people from the other nationality. If we overlap, and now this is no data correlation, this is pure qualitative interpretation of the findings, okay? So of those of you who are okay and like qualitative methods, this is totally fine. Of those who are a bit more skeptical, then I would have to show you the email exchanges with the reports from the medical doctor. This is what we find. We see that up until here, somehow, things were doing quite well in terms of intergroup dynamics and individual and collective trajectories. But then, halfway through, the increase in within interactions matches the change in the trajectories of the, let's say, positive and less negative individual and collective factors. So all this to say that, and it's the same, of course, for the teamwork as well. So we see that the spike in conflict roughly matches the increase in group polarization. And all of this, and to end, all of this speaks to the importance, first, of considering multiple factors to allow triangulation, because these, even with small groups, it really increases the strength of the conclusions and the predictions that we can make. So it's the importance of a diverse, like a collection of different approaches to look at the same phenomena, because even though it's a small sample size, if all the different kind of data with different methodologies all point in the same direction, that increases it decreases our uncertainty that there's a pattern there, that it what happened not by chance. So takeaway messages are that badges or wearables are also quite promising when it comes to study and predict, but we're not there yet. Describe and predict human behavior, because we can know if someone is spending too much time alone, that either signals depression, or roughly speaking, or it signals group ostracization, that's the word. So they can signal both things, but it also signals how cohesive a group is or how conflict is imminent within a larger group. And that this correlates with surveys that have been fairly tested, we have enough data to know that they're robust, they make good predictions. And so if there's a good correlation, probably there's a path to explore. And also, our findings, they do signal some important aspects in terms of countermeasures, some that you can deploy before the mission, mostly oriented towards training. The training, again, the selection, and the fact that all the people involved in a mission planning should be, sorry, what I mean is all the people involved in a mission, not just the crew or not just managers or mission control, they should somehow be involved and made responsible for what is going on. And there's the potential here of psychological safety and team reflexivity as countermeasures, because from previous evidence with hospitals, police special forces, and project teams at Google, these two are quite potent in terms of increasing teamwork, decreasing conflict, and mental illness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, speaking about Concordia today, we have a Concordia medical doctor, Adriano, to put you on spot. So he was there for a year. I was actually wondering, did you also visualize these results, these like tendencies towards the end that performance decrease, like paranoia? I wasn't wondering, actually. Sorry, I took over the first question, and not to you, Pedro. Sorry.
Thank you, Ines. And now I know better than to ask a question in the first session of the morning. But no, happy if I can chime in. Of course, I did one winter over. It was a few years back, so it's kind of empirical. But I would say that it correlates with what was presented. I know it can be different from one crew to another. And also, I think we have, the countermeasures actually have improved since. But I would say, yeah, I mean, there is this question always about the third quarter phenomenon, right? I think in our case, there was a dip in not necessarily performance, but maybe team performance or how we all got together. Of course, you have the effect of the winter where you don't see the sunlight for several weeks, actually. You don't sleep well. You begin to realize you have half of the mission ahead of you. You're stuck with the same people, even if you like them. So yeah, I think all these factors accumulate and they give you a kind of a hard time. But I think there are also quite a few differences between crews. And for example, I think it was mentioned before that in a station like Concordia, which is a great analog because we have different nationalities, you can see sometimes that, I don't know, this nationality sticks with their own and that one. But it's just not just that. I think in our case, it was more cultural. Like I think the science people were, clustering together and the technical people were clustering together. So it was not necessarily based on that. But we did also experience that more after midwinter, so after the middle of the mission.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so there's previous work by Carole Taforin, I think published in 2015 and a bit earlier than that, where they also used sociometric methods, but it was the medical doctor actually doing the sociometry analysis. So they had a map of the common room, and at mealtime they would mark who was sitting with whom. And this is exactly as you say. So depending on the expedition, sometimes the people group by expertise, and sometimes they group by nationality. So maybe we need to look at their profiles to understand and the mission timeline to understand what was happening and what might have helped explaining this tendency to grouping by culture or to group by a role, because you also see that in summer missions that are shorter. But then there's a nuance. But anyway, but thank you, because I think that's also a relevant question here. And we can answer with the badges, because we really had to anonymize it so that people would trust and wear the badges. So we have no idea. We just know the nationality, but we have no idea of who was wearing the badges.
Thank you. One question, because I would like to also have some time for a panel discussion in the end. So maybe one more question, then you can also ask in the end. Okay. So maybe I will introduce Agnieszka. So I apologize in advance if I don't read correctly anything.
It's very correct.
So next we have Agnieszka Skorupa. So she's assistant professor in the University of Silesia in Katowice.
Katowice, yeah.
Katowice.
Sounds great.
So she's the PI of the Astro Mental Health Project, which is running Lunarius research session. And also she will talk a bit about the Poland mission and the project that will also be there. So I will give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I will just, check whether it's working. It is, so perfect. Nice to be here, and thank you for the invitation. And I'm very happy to have my presentation after the two great speakers. And I believe that I can contribute a little bit more to what you've said previously, because we are investigating more or less the same phenomena, but maybe with the use of different optic. So I believe that it's also very nice to have this perspective. As you can see on the first slide, I would like to introduce you a little bit to the psychological approach we are taking in Polish studies. And as you mentioned, I'm PI of the experiment, but you have, a very big team here mentioned. These are not only one cooperators of ours, so we are using expertise of different psychologists, linguistics, and other people, so professionals. So I think that that's super cool and great. And why I'm here? Because I'm passionate of extreme environments, personally and professionally. And I've started from exploration of polar expeditioners. Many of you mentioned Concordia Station during these workshops, not only today, but during other presentations. And I started to collect data, and it was my PhD topic, in Horsund Polish Polar Station. I don't know if you are aware. This is like a picture, my picture from Polar Summer. So sorry, maybe it doesn't look very polar way, but yes, this is a polar station. But also we have another station. This is Arktowski Polish Antarctic Station. It's located quite far away from Concordia, but still in the same region. So I'm doing science in these two places, but I'm also training expeditioners before their expedition participation. And I'm meaning here 1 year long expedition by the group of around 10 people. So, and what is also important, in Poland we have the expeditions single culture. So it doesn't reflect totally the conditions you can face on ISS, for example, because the teams are interculturally different. But still, we are doing here a lot of interesting science and training. And what I would like to share with you, because I was thinking about the topic of our panel, it's about team dynamic. And this is always my first thought when the team is starting to be a team. So we are selecting individuals to take part into the mission. For example, polar expedition. And when they are starting to be a team, when they are actually in the North Pole or South Pole, or when they are starting to meet before the expedition, and we are starting to training them. So, and it's not the guarantee that you will participate in the mission, even if you are undergoing training. So the group will change. So this is like an open, reflection. Just I wanted to share that information with you to have it in your mind. So, the polar stations are classified ICE environment, so isolated, confined, and extreme. And this information, and this is the biggest, I would say, focus of interest in scientific perspective, but this runs me smoothly from the polar station experiences to analog space missions. And I don't know if everybody are aware, if not, I will happily share the information, that we have Lunares research station in Poland, and it's a really great facility operating 2 weeks long analog missions. They are fully isolated from the social perspective. Of course, they cannot reflect, for example, microgravity or other conditions which would be faced by human beings in space, but still they are trying to reflect social isolation and confinement. So we can test their group dynamic definitely, or individual adaptation. And my cooperation started even few years before, it's written here on the slide, but in 2022 we established official cooperation with Lunares, and since that time we are collecting scientific data on different aspects of isolated group behavior and performance. And as you can see here, and my previous speakers mentioned also those situations, people here on this picture, they are wearing masks because we established our cooperation in COVID times. And we were, extremely worried that it will stop our project. But, reflecting the previous questions, It even enhanced that more because it appears that our studies are needed also for the general public, not only to the space sector. So that's a very interesting aspect. And for those who don't know, where is Lunaris? It's located in Piła in Poland. So maybe I will show the Warsaw is here. So we are more or less here. So, so it's there. And it's an open science platform for international studies, so everybody are also happy to apply there. So you can apply the your study project also to be introduced. They are doing different aspects of simulation. They do have place to simulate EVAs, so that's also very nice. You can run biolab, you can test engineering projects, so it's up to you, but they create you some potential aspects of applications of your scientific projects. And what we've been doing there, we've been studying a lot of psychological processes. The longest and I believe the most important project of ours is psychological indicators of an effective adaptation to the analog space missions. And I'm using in purpose expression to the analog space mission because this is also another open question whether we can generalize data we collected there. So to be on the safe side, I definitely can claim that these are indicators of an effective adaptation to analog space mission. But I hope that some reflections can be applied in different environments. So this was the longest project. Along with that, we've got human-robot interaction exploration. And here together today, together with me, there is Mateusz Paliga. He's also a PhD from University of Silesia in Katowice. And this is your topic of study, definitely. And we also explored group dynamic and eating behaviors. This is a fascinating topic because, you know, the perceived scarcity of food, if you perceive that the food is disappearing, even if you've got guaranteed that it will be enough for you to survive, the psychological aspects are, you know, evoked and your emotional states are changing. So that's a fascinating aspect. And also, and this is my field of interest, and I'm introducing two last projects with the youngest crew of ours. So the two last aspects are about proneness to transport into a space analog situation. And for me, it's very important, and those two we are just finishing collecting data, because, you know, many people are claiming that, also you showed us a paper about challenges of future space exploration, and analogs also, they have a lot of limitations. We are not so sure up to what point we can imply their results into space. And if we are talking about long flights, it's a game changer. But what also bothers me and interests me from the scientific perspective is how much people do trust that analogs are real situations, or maybe just are pretending, playing, having fun there. So it's not about lack of microgravity, it's about your immersion in the situation, whether you believe that it's real job for you. So these are our also two projects. So the first study, the longest one, as I mentioned to you, is the one we are the most proud of because we collected 100 samples from, created of 100 analog astronauts. So it's pretty big, and I believe that is a countermeasure on, for example, Petro, you mentioned the small group challenges. So I hope that this gives us a chance to maybe to come to more valid conclusions. I don't know, that's my open idea. So it was 19 mission participating, but to be honest, 100 analog astronauts participated in the study, but we are counting everything we are, doing, calculating on the population of 88 people. Because there was a dropout, because not everybody filled in questionnaires through all days of isolation. So to be honest, 88 people filled it 100%. So I believe that's super cool also. And for example, we successfully published the first paper on this data, and this comes to the question, to the issue what was raised by medical doctor from Concordia. Yeah? So the third quarter phenomena. And this was also for me this topic I'm fascinated about. So whether there is a change after the half of the mission of performance, of emotional states, of group dynamic. And it happens that we cannot confirm that. So in our observations, taking into account 19 analog missions, there is no pattern of a swift emotional or I don't know, any other performance swift after the half of the mission and recovering, after the third quarter is finished. So for me, this is fascinating to be able to calculate those data on big population, big meaning big for analog, analogs or other isolated studies. So what we are also finishing, so what publications we are working now, mindfulness is after reviews. So whether mindfulness can contribute to adaptation to space analogs. Yes, definitely and deeply, and it's contributing to all parameters we are exploring. So that's super important and supporting your previously collected data. We are taking a closer look to personality characteristics, to gender differences, or much more. And I will leave you here with just a word much more. And just wanted to show you some data, not to just inform you about my assumptions about people behavior. I wanted to share you a very small sample of data about those gender differences, because I think that also this is a topic which evokes some emotions. And these data, these calculations were not performed on the 88 people sample, but because it was for the use of different conference when we have not finished yet collect whole data, so it's on 66 people, okay? And please have a closer look with me. Okay, it's not very legible, but I will do my best. These are mixed models, so we are checking some phenomena, some psychological phenomena, taking as a factor gender, day of isolation, or the specific group. And nearly no differences between female and male participants were discovered. This can be contributed to the very flattened profile of personality of those who are applying to be in extreme environments. So profiles of ladies and men who would like to be astronauts or any other personnel operating in extreme environments, they're very similar, which is not as in general population. This is also quite interesting. But look on that, here is important difference. And when you are considering sex factors, so being female or male, and ladies were more tired, so they were indicating higher tiredness over the course of the analog mission. And when we are, calculating stress or general positive or negative emotion scores, no differences. But we have a little tendency. It's not a very relevant score. Here, this is group dynamic questionnaire, and the factor 2, it's a conflict factor. So it means that when you have, but not being a lady or man, but having a female proportion in group, make it more probable to have to experience conflict. So the higher ladies proportion, the higher probability of having scores in factor 2, which indicates a conflict in the group. That's interesting, but this is like a tendency. But here you've got statistically relevant data. So being a female participant means that you assess your performance higher. These were these bottom assessments. They were 360 assessments, so everybody assessed everybody, including yourself. So how well you adapted to the analog mission, and that was daily assessment. So these are general scores, and ladies assessed that more, their performance more effectively. This is summary. These are only valid scores. So, but please remember that this one is like a tendency. It's not valid in statistical way we are looking for. So this is fascinating in that way. We can speculate why it is like that. Maybe tiredness is due to physiological differences, and we should definitely involve more parameters to interpret the score. Self-assessment maybe is to stereotypical roles, who should adapt better or who should evaluate themselves better or worse adapt. At the group dynamic, we could find some confirmation in literature that the proportion of female or male participants is important to experiencing conflict. This is open for discussion. I am not providing you, interpretation which are which will be, giving you a 100% certainty. I'm just showing you some tendencies, and please remember it was on 66 analog astronauts, so it's not the total group which we studied. Finishing the analog information and where we are now. We are in the moment that Poland received a possibility to participate in manned space mission. So we are operating Polish Science and Technology mission to the ISS. And we are very happy, and I'm telling we, meaning I'm and Mateusz, and I'm with my team, that we will be a part of projects, scientific projects realized on the ISS. So this super important information. So this is the journey from polar stations through analogs and up to space. So I believe that's really great. And because we recruit, so our Polish astronaut was chosen to be one of participant of Axiom 4 missioners. So we will have a possibility to introduce our project. It was financed by a Ministry of Technology and Development from Poland, Polish Space Agency, European Space Agency. So all those aspects, all those agencies help us to implement our psychological study, and we are super great to those supporters. And our study is mental health. Again, it's very general, so we are exploring a few factors of psychological factors in the same time, but it's done in purpose because it's like one lifetime shot that we have this opportunity. So the more we can do, the better for us, of course, with the respect of capacity of individuals who will take part in our study, because it's very important to respect their time and possibility to involve. And just to give you a very brief outline what we are doing, so the research structure is very simple. We conducted, we accomplished this stage so far, 2 pilot studies in Lunaris to check whether the procedures are applicable, relevant, doable, whatever. And we have procedures pre-flight and after flight and during flight. But what is the idea? We will not only imply the study on ISS, but in the same time we will organize mirror mission on the ground level just to realize our second goal. So not only to verify some psychological phenomena, but also to be as close as possible to answer the question up to what point we can trust analogs to generalize scores, results, which we are receiving from which we are observing on the sky and on ground. So these are objectives. They are very general here because we can, of course, go more in detail. If you are interested, we can talk about more. But we are interested in some individual traits, so predispositions to adapt. We are interested in environment relations. So this is fascinating because, meaning environment, it's not necessarily also, but it's also important, as it was mentioned by Pedro, humidity, also contextual factors, because we will be able to get some data from ISS on that, and Lunaris is also monitoring some parameters, but also environment can be perceived as technology environment. Okay, this is also the context those people are immersed in. We are exploring work-related context, also well-being context, and of course my field of interest phases, so whether we can see some fluctuations over the course of the mission with different parameters, and here this third quarter phenomena would can have a place. And the yellow place and the yellow information is, for me, I think that the most important, to what point we can trust analogs. Do they reflect what people experience on ISS or in any other kind of space flights? What we are doing, we are collecting qualitative and quantitative data, and I should finish. Okay, I will. These 2 last slides. Okay, so quantitative and qualitative data, we are encouraging astronauts to perform video diaries, and we will analyze it thanks to not only verbal content, but also facial emotional expression. So I think that this is added value, and of course we will use a set of questionnaires pre-validated before. And this is the last slide. So how about group dynamic here? And I just wanted to share one reflection with you. I believe that in instrumental health, group dynamic is impossible to study because there are a lot of obstacles. So the first issue is who is a group participant or group member on ISS. Axiom 4 are joining other astronauts who are there for longer time. Where is the group? Who will be a group member? And another question is a very pragmatic one. Different agencies are giving you permissions to propose your study to particular astronaut. So it makes it super challenging from the research design perspective. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open for question if there is a time for question.
There is time. Any question? Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to use the last 10 minutes just for a few discussions to all the presenters, and also I wanted to include also Adriano's, he accepted, because since he's the ISS flight surgeon and also the ESA the medical board on Concorde, I think he might also have personal insights that may help. So one of my questions to the four of you is, what coping strategies have proven effective in managing stress, loneliness, monotony during the mission, even on analogs, and on team dynamics as well? So, like, what are the strategies there that are already proven? Like, for example, resilience training, or can you comment a bit on that?
I can say on that regard that for like what Francesco showed, so for team level training, there's plenty of protocols that have been tested, not necessarily for space, but they are in place. And some interventions, they take 10 minutes to be done, to be implemented. Others take a couple of hours or days, but there are things that have been tested for extreme environments that then can be probably implemented to isolated, confined, and extreme environments.
And one of the things I mentioned was resilience training, because we were actually discussing yesterday, I think with Karina as well, who is there. Like, for example, with Navy, she works in Navy, and the behavior sometimes is different because they have more a military approach, so they have to make the things happen. They have to really cooperate together. They have to have a good relationship. So that's why I was more interested in knowing coping strategies, and if that is also one that you would think would be effective, being the population slightly different. We are not dealing with military people when we go to space. We may hire them for astronauts, but they will be astronauts then. So, okay, you can elaborate.
Well, you know, if you open if you open the discussion to the military aspect, there are many options, because, of course, military training and military psychology has a lot of options for improving resilience, reducing stress. So there's a huge variety. Most of these things may apply to the space context. Some of them probably would not. So, for example, just to mention one, in the military context, there is this training for PTSD, which is stress inoculated training, in which you really stress, your elite military, and then you send them out to the battlefield, and the risk for developing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, gets really low because you have pre-trained them for that. But I don't think that would apply for space, at least not in that format. Maybe something like survival training could mirror part of that. Not because of these survival skills, but simply because putting the astronauts in a harsh environment will have them testing their limit, their capabilities, so that will make them more resilient. But to be honest, if we take the comparison with the medical, the physical countermeasures, I don't think there is enough science as much as there is in the physiotherapy, just for saying once. So there's way more evidence on that side than on the psychological ones. We need to do more research.
I can add something. Thank you. I think it's a valid point. And I think on the one hand, it's good to come up with coping strategies and train the team that will be in isolation or in extreme environments. The other thing is that usually you can train them only before. And sometimes, at least from my experience, it's hard to keep the entire team actually devoted to keep using those techniques. So I think that's an area that we can try to think of how to improve to make sure that it works through the entire mission.
And do you think about the role of leadership? Like how important it is? Does it play a big role? Did you experience that in Concordia even, and even for Pedro, was there a role of leadership that you could see from your results, or that you, I don't know, so if there was, if you know the composition of the crew, and if you know there is a leadership, or even on the ISS context or in the Concordia, if that really plays a role, how it can, if it really contributes to failure or to success. Can you comment?
Start. So I think on the ISS it's a good example because it's even more diverse, even backgrounds, right? You can have people from the military, from science, from other domains, and also different cultures, different nationalities, different languages. But I think it's great that there is training for the ISS commander role, and also previous experience plays a role in that. In analogs, of course, the resources are usually fewer, so you have to make do with what you can. But I think, training the team, so the leader, but also the others on how the structure works, because you don't want a leader that actually is authoritarian or tries to make things work in that line, right? You need to have appreciation, and you have to have a shared model, so to speak. I think it's very important, and again, it needs to last through the year, because sometimes you can have it in the beginning, but then people just lose confidence, or, you studied that, right?
Maybe Agnieszka can also comment.
I would have a little comment because I'm, touching this subject when I'm training polar expeditioners before they are going to expedition, and this is very important, very fascinating, because when you're digging into literature, the best profile of polar leader is a flexible leader. So at the beginning, you should be more, directive, and on the end, you should be more flexible and give power to others. So how can we find those people? And because it's very hard to combine these two qualities, because it's about being able to lose your power to give it to others, but on the beginning, they really are looking at you, what you will do in the situation, because the situation is new for us. So that's also a fascinating topic to explore.
And my last question, and then I'd give the floor for the others. About one of the things that, was not maybe addressed in detail here today, but that I also think it's of interest, is the reintegration after mission. I know that there are challenges when astronauts come from, or even when there is an Antarctic mission, and there is reintegration challenges where they don't feel that they belong, or they have problems with that. Have you experienced that in your studies, or yourself even, or with astronauts, or with volunteers that participated in your studies? Have you seen that in the results, or
Nothing
and how
my side.
addressed?
Nothing from my side. No, mostly because of the short duration missions, and at Concordia we didn't follow up. But with the analogs and the missions in Antarctica in the summer. At least with Antarctica, there's a lot of researchers that want to go back because they also love that environment. But I think I haven't received any informal or formal reports on issues with reintegration, at least for missions between 2 weeks and 3 months.
But this is also a very important question, and thank you that you are touching this topic, because I believe that we should have follow-ups. But from my perspective, it's the most challenging to organize, because people are quickly immersed in different reality. Astronauts has also pre-planned all activities after the mission is finished, and it's hard to propose the study. But when we are talking about polar personnel or analog astronauts, they've got a lot of real life deals to cope with when they are finishing mission. And we are proposing them in our few projects, questionnaires and interviews after the mission is finished, and it's the less frequently filled in or realized done procedure of ours.
If I can add some personal flavor, I remember myself a few years back. Let's start with ISS. I think the role of the flight surgeon, but not only, the psychologist colleagues, the biomedical engineers, everyone that helps with rehabilitation is also to help the person psychologically transit back to life on Earth, right? And as you know, they're very sought after by the media. They have a lot of research to provide in the same time. So finding a balance for them and still affording the time to sleep well, to recover physically, to see the family that they haven't seen for so much time, that's tough. So the Concordia experience a few years back, it was quite fascinating. Actually, I came back and you have I wouldn't say you have problems, but you have challenges. For example, I forgot the pin of my card. You know, I hadn't used my card for a year. So, but that's small things. Then again, I think training again can be useful to tell people that go there, winter over a cruise, but also the families, what to expect. And for me, I would advise against what I did, which was jump back to everything, you know, at once. So, you know, you have this feeling that, okay, I did a winter over, I can jump back to everything at once, but everyone wants to see you, everyone wants to hear the stories and all that, and it can be quite fatiguing, and I think that brings your performance down.
Okay.
Yeah, but just
please,
no,
Francisco,
very
sorry.
quickly, because to build on that and to emphasize, in the white paper and study groups, we really emphasize the fact that there is not much research. We don't know a lot about what happens after, from a psychological perspective, because there's a lot of research about, you know, the physical countermeasures from space, because it makes total sense, but comparatively, that's an underdeveloped part from psychology.
Then we should address it. Any questions? Floris, I know you had one. I'm owning you.
Okay, thank you. I consider my psychological safety rather high to ask the next question. Given the fact that when we go with a team of 6 people to Mars, and it has to be, I guess, 3 women, 3 men. I mean, that's a given, I think. Presumably also from different cultures, because representing the Earth. But still, that makes things very complicated to have a intrinsic leadership which is being accepted throughout the entire journey. So it may sound a crazy idea, but well, sometimes it should be. That's why my psychological safety should be high. Why don't we send a family where is a man and a woman, a husband and wife? So the wife is the boss, the husband is the commander. And then, but they were, for instance, from, one person is from, I don't know, Australia, the other from, I don't know, 2 different countries, and 4 smart children who accept intrinsically the leadership of their parents. And obviously they should have a PhD in in different domains. So we have a couple of years to search for this, but I mean, it could be a different approach of indeed a natural accepted leadership, okay, with all its problems also, but why not this model? I know there is one difficult issue there is, suppose one has to sacrifice one of the members of the team members for a certain reason of radiation, whatever. Obviously, that would be even a more problematic decision for a father or a mother to have to sacrifice a crew member for the safety of the others. So that's one thought, but I'd like to have your idea.
If I can make a comment, I think we would be at the high risk of a first case of space divorce. So I don't know if we want to cross that bridge. Just my personal opinion. But I think you're perfectly right that the mixture is going to be complex, and for sure there are a few things that we know, taking from the selection that has already been done so far. The astronaut that will be selected will have a high level of social and emotional intelligence. That's for sure. We know that. So that's a very basic thing. Then building on it, other characteristics still to be determined. But that's very important because, of course, to navigate the differences in culture, genders, and roles, this is something that requires some form of social intelligence so that you realize where you are, your role, your context, your relationship, your emotions, all these things. And possibly we can also train them to further boost these characteristics. I don't know about the family though.
If I may, you can also, so right now there's research and training ongoing to experiment different leadership arrangements. So you can actually have a standard leadership arrangement focus on one single person, but you can also select profiles and train people to engage in a shared approach where everyone is more or less equally open to follow or lead. And for the long duration space missions, what I've been reading and talking to people, that's the trend. So you have a clearly established command line, mostly as Agnieszka was explaining about the importance of having a clear command line in the beginning. but then everyone is able at any moment in time to step up and take on the leadership of the crew. And you can select profiles that are more willing to do that, and also train people to have the skills to change roles more systematically. As for the family, I would say that from the cohesion point of view, it makes absolute sense, but we also know that too much cohesion is actually harmful, and the family would bring in the high cohesion factor, but then you need some loosely coupled relationships that give you the flexibility sometimes to make difficult decisions. And if it's too tight of a network, in the end it collapses collectively. So there's I know there's research on that ongoing, but it's still a fine line between the optimal and suboptimal level of cohesion.
If I can add something, we had experiences with marriages in Polish polar stations. Of course, it's not like there is marriage and children, but there is a marriage and other, co-expeditioners. But still, it's up to our observation, because it was never investigated as a formal study, it not necessarily support the group dynamic. Okay, because maybe it depends of your marriage quality, of other factors, and we should always keep in mind that families, they do have their own dynamic and their own challenges, because they are doing social structure a little bit differently than we as a random group. So I appreciate the idea, but from my observations so far, it not necessarily would help, or I don't know up to what extent it would help.
I must say that if I would have to work with my husband, I would think he would only live one more few months, and then with him. So sorry.
If I can add a small thing. First of all, I appreciate very much Dr. Voigt's challenging question, and I think that's great to ask those questions. That's the scientific and research spirit. I would argue, though, that in a family, I agree, the intrinsic leadership comes with the parents, but I think it's a great example of how members of a family, also because of the difference of age, can be better in different things. So, for example, usually children are more apt into technology advancements, or how to use IT, for example. So I think it's what I would take from the idea was that we can mimic nature in these structures to see how that works from space. I don't know if you would just take a family that is there and inject it into space, but maybe mimicking some variability in age or gender could be helpful.
And if I may, like in the short mission I showed you in the lava tube, we cannot say it's family, blood-wise it's not, but the fact that we were like 10 people working intensively over 4 months, even if remotely, with every now and then a face-to-face meeting, and everyone was so committed to the mission that at some point during the mission there was this kind of, actually people were joking, because the guys in charge of mission control, at some point we were joking, but because we were calling the head of mission control that. But that was only possible, and we barely knew each other, or we didn't know each other at all 4 months earlier. It was because of the involvement of everyone in the preparation of the mission that those relationships were able to develop, although because we were not family, it was much easier to say someone whatever we wanted to say if we were not in agreement.
Okay, we are over time, but if there is really one question that, because I don't want to take the time of others, I also did my questions. It's a bit unfair. Okay. Well, thank you very much for being here. I really loved the session. Thank you so much for all of you. And thank you, Adrianus, for stepping in. I put you on spot.
Thanks for putting me on the
you
spot,
said yes. Yeah. You said yes, so it's very dangerous. But thank you so much. It was really interesting. And I think, we can now go for lunch and we adjourn later on. Okay, ciao.